My name is Tim Conklin, and I'm with the Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Commission. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone, please to sign up for tonight's event. The event has been approved for AICP, AIA, and ASCP credits. For those that are AIA certified and looking for credits, please sign your AIA sheet at the desk up there and put your AIA number next to your name, please. Would like to thank the Walton Family Foundation for funding this four-part series. I'd like to thank the foundation for their continued support and investment to improve the quality of life in the home region. With its 2020 Home Region Strategic Plan, the Walton Family Foundation plans to invest more than $300 million in strategies that enhance the quality of life and produce world-class results within the home region. I'd like to give them a round of applause. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I'd like to introduce Fayetteville Mayor Lionel Jordan to welcome us to tonight's event. I first met Lionel Jordan in 2000 when he was elected to the Fayetteville City Council. It was during his 8 years on City Council I got to know Mayor Jordan very well, as many developments occurred in the Ward 4 area. I don't think a week or a month went by without Alderman Jordan at the time contacting me and asking how that development would impact his ward, the city, the quality of life for its current and future residents. And he was a true supporter of planning and really enjoyed working with Alderman Jordan at the time when I was city planner of the city. As an alderman, he is very passionate about learning what is being planned in his ward, in the city, and once again, once that development did get built within the city, he always wanted to look at it and make sure that it improved the quality of life and livability for those in that area and for the residents of the city, current and future. I would recall that during very contentious rezonings or development approvals, after the development was built, I'd like to share this story, Lionel, because I think it's valuable for staff and others in the region to actually go look at what has been approved within your community. And I had the opportunity to drive the city council around on their city council tours every couple of weeks in Fayetteville, and we actually got to look at what was built in the city. And we're always striving to make development better within the city of Fayetteville and the region. And I would strongly encourage everybody to look at post-city council action review. So thank you for that, Lionel. Mayor Jordan is now in his third term as mayor and continues to bring his passion as a public servant to the city day after day, improving the quality of life and sets a place in Fayetteville and making lives better for all people in the community and region. He was elected as mayor in November 2008, again in 2012, and has now served his third term of the election in 2016. So he's been alderman since 2000 and third term of mayor to 2020. So 20 years of service to the city. I'd like to thank him for that. I'd now like to present Mayor Jordan to welcome you to this event tonight. Thank you.
Well, Tim was being relatively kind. I was a little bit, probably a little more contentious in my younger days. I've gotten older and friendlier. But Tim did a great job. I've been fortunate to be blessed with some tremendous planners in this city. And I certainly want to thank you, Tim, for inviting me to say a few words at this event. And I certainly want to thank the Walton Family Foundation. Let's give them another round of applause. I also want to thank the Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Commission, Ozark Regional Transit, and American Planning Association Arkansas Chapter for making all this, making this event happen. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Jeff Speck here in Fayetteville to speak about mobility for a growing region and to discuss his book, Walkable City. That is absolutely a fantastic book. I really enjoyed reading this book. I've read it since I knew it was coming. I've read it twice in the last 2 or 3 months, and I actually use that book as a reference when I'm thinking about transit, or I'm thinking about growth of the city, or how we're going to plan the city. I look at all those chapters, and I go back and refer to that. So it's been just really a fantastic book for me. To give you a little idea of this city, the city's population is expected to grow by more than 40% over the next 20 years. That's significant growth. We've got a plan for the future right now. I know that some of the things that we are working on is I'm sure you've heard about the new energy action plan that we have going on in this city. And folks, we're going to get off fossil fuels. And one of the ways we do that is through making the city walkable. I know that our streets make up about 50% of our public space in Fayetteville, but I also realize that properly designed as streets foster business activity, serve as a front yard for our residents, provide a safe place for people to get around, whether by foot, a bicycle, or a car, or public transit. And for years, Fayetteville's transportation network has been designed primarily, and some streets exclusively, to optimize vehicle throughput. To address these kind of issues, Fayetteville is nearing the completion of a new mobility plan. The plan outlines a blueprint for long-term multimodal mobility in the city of Fayetteville based on the operating environment, transportation policy goals, and land use trends. The plan addresses the needs of all travelers. So Fayetteville is widely recognized for being one of the most livable cities in the country, and we're deeply committed to improving how residents, employees, visitors, and others experience Fayetteville, whether you drive, ride a bike, or walk, or use public transit. Jeff, I know from reading your book, I know that you've thought deeply about these important subjects, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But folks, it's time. It's time for a new day, not only in this city, but in this country. It's time to get off the fossil fuels. It's time to plan for the future. I've got council members. I see Matthew Petty sitting out here tonight. I see the planning commission sitting here, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the stand that you're taking. And it's not whether this city is going to grow or this region is going to grow, but it's how we grow it. And how we grow it and the decisions we make today will affect our children and our children's children for all future generations. And folks, right now, we've got to get it right. And we're going to get it right. So Jeff, thank you. I look forward to hearing you. Welcome to the city.
Thank you, Mayor Lionel Jordan. I just love your passion. I love your passion for this city. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Mr. Jeff Speck, AICP, CNUA, Lead AP, and Honorary ASLA. He's a principal with Speck Associates, LLC. Jeff Speck is a city planner and urban designer who advocates internationally for more walkable cities. As director of the design at the National Endowment of the Arts from 2003 to 2007, he presided over the Mayor's Institute on City Design and created the Governor's Institute on Community Design. Prior to his federal appointment, Mr. Speck spent 10 years as director of town planning for Dwani Platter Zyber, or DPZ Company, the principal firm behind the New Urbanism movement. Since 2007, he has led Speck Associates, a boutique planning firm that specializes in making American downtowns thrive. I'm so excited to see many of the downtown organizations here tonight. I think we have a lot to learn from Mr. Speck making our downtowns thrive. With Andrews Dewani and Elizabeth Plater Zyber, Mr. Speck is a co-author of the Smart Growth Manual and the modern classic Suburban Nation. Many of you probably have read this book, and if you haven't, I strongly suggest you pick up a copy and read it. which the Wall Street Journal calls the Urbanist Bible. His latest book, Walkable City, which the Christian Science Monitor calls timely and important, a delightful, insightful, irreverent work, was the best-selling city planning book of 2013 and 2016. Once again, I'd like to thank the Walton Family Foundation for making it possible to distribute 100 copies to the first 100 attendees this evening. Once you read it, if someone didn't get a copy of the book, if you would share that with them, that would be great. Or you also could purchase one of these books at a local bookstore. With that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Jeff Speck.
First of all, thank you all for coming. I've never seen so many people show up with my book. It's amazing. They all look so crisp and clean. I should thank the Walton Family Foundation for supplying them and also for sponsoring this event. Thank you to the Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Commission. Mayor Jordan, that's the most rousing warm-up I've ever gotten. I don't think I can match you in energy. But, you know, I do a lot of work in Oklahoma. I just finished a downtown master plan for Tulsa. I did one prior for Oklahoma City. They don't talk about getting off of fossil fuels in Oklahoma. So I'm grateful for your leadership, and everyone I talk to seems to have some experience or just great interest in city planning. I'm here to talk about the Walkable City, but I'm really here just to talk about better cities. The Walkable City is a way that I present the message, but I think it'll be clear by the end of my talk that this isn't just about, you have this mobility series. So you have biking and transit. And walking is one of the mobilities, right? But I didn't come at this from a walking background. I came at it from a design background and someone who loves cities and loves to help cities get better. I found that framing the discussion in terms of walkability just makes it a lot easier for people to understand and to act on. So I am here to talk to you tonight about walking, but really just to talk about cities. So I have to get where I can see my slides as well as you. So I like to give two types of talks about the Walkable City. Talks about why we need it and talks about how to do it. And the why we need it talk is a longer talk. I don't have time to give you much of that talk tonight, but you can go to TED.com. And the why walkability talk is one that I'm very, I'm ardent that it get out there and people hear it. I'm going to give you a very short version of it tonight. And if you don't like it, you should watch the longer version because it's better. But the short version is this lesson that I learned as a planner that many of us were surprised about 15 years ago or so. We've been planners, we've been arguing for more walkable cities for many years. We've kind of been shouting into the wilderness, giving our planning reasons why cities should be more walkable for the sake of more beautiful places and better community and all the things that planners talk about. And then we discovered that there were these three other groups, the economists, the environmentalists, and the epidemiologists, who were arguing for the same stuff, but each one from their own hymnal and with much more uptake than we were getting. People tend to listen to these folks more than they listen to planners. So the arguments for why walkability that you'll find actually in Walkable City are these three arguments. The economic argument, it's kind of a good side, and I should say a bad side, a sad side, and a more optimistic side. The sad side is that from 1970, we spent about 10%. As Americans, 10% of our income on transportation. And between 1970 and 2010, we basically doubled the number of roads in our country. And now, in 2010, we spend 20% of our income on transportation. So what we did was we chose this growth pattern where it was going to be all based on driving, and we were going to essentially make one car per adult a requirement for just living your life in our society. And so we hooked ourselves to this wagon, which was the most expensive way to get around. So transportation, and we move no faster than we did in terms of actual miles per hour as we're moving through cities. We move no faster than we did 50 years ago, but we're paying twice as much for it. That's the sad side. The other part, though, that's a little more optimistic, is that the typical family that spread out suburbia was created to serve. The automobile society was created to serve. Now only about 22% of American families are two parents with a kid or kids. Meanwhile, look at the housing stock in our country. right? And the suburban model that's proliferated around the automobile, and actually it's 66% of what we've got. And our country is growing, right, by millions of people every year. It's anticipated to grow a ton in the next few decades. And where are all those people going to go? And this tremendous mismatch that exists between supply and demand for what people really will tell you in polls that they want is why we have a lot of hope for seeing new economic development, but also just new growth around the idea of the traditional city, the walkable city. If you poll, every mayor, every city leader tells me that they want to attract millennials, they want young people in their city, they want these engines of entrepreneurship in their city. Well, if you poll millennials, 77% of them will tell you they plan to live in America's urban cores. And actually, interestingly, 64% of millennials first decide where they want to live, then they move there, and then only then do they look for a job. So they're really place-focused, and this is the sort of place that they want. But it doesn't have to be New York. They can't afford New York. It can be the more urban parts, really, of any region. Particularly, they might want to stay. Many of them will tell you they want to stay not too far from where they grew up, but they want a more urban environment. The environmentalist argument is an interesting one because environmentalism is clearly something we all need to become very quickly if we're not already. Hurricane Sandy in New York, the most recent one, I can't remember the name, there's so many now, in Houston. But the environmental movement in the US has historically been an anti-city movement, an anti-urban, anti-dense movement. And it's a long tradition in the US to be anti-city, from Jefferson on. Jefferson said, cities are pestilential to the health, to the liberties, to the morals of man. If we continue to collect in cities as they do in Europe, we shall become as corrupt as they are in Europe and take to eating one another as they do there. And the history of the environmental movement has been, about communing with nature. It's always been anti-city, and it only became more so when we started measuring carbon. Because if you measure carbon the way everyone measures carbon, and this is Chicago, but I could give you this map of any city, it's hottest when there's the most people, right? More people, more carbon. So it's red hot in the city centers, it's yellow in the suburbs, and it's nice and cool and blue and green in the surrounding hinterland. But at a certain point, the environmentalists asked the question, is this the right way to measure carbon? They said, no, we should be measuring by square mile, we should be measuring by household. Because there's only so many of us in the country at any given time, and we can choose to locate where we're going to have a smaller carbon footprint. And when you measure by household, the maps just completely fail. And the environmentalists are now aware of this map, and the smart environmentalists are saying, we humans were a destructive species. If you love nature, the best thing you should do is stay the hell away from it and collect in cities, and the denser the better. So that's a really powerful discussion. And even the fuel companies, this is like a billboard for McDonald's saying, I will stop eating hamburgers. But in any case, this Chevron billboard, this idea, I'm just going to make the choice as someone who wants to do the right thing to drive less. But if this is the environment today, if this is the environment that surrounds your home, that really isn't a choice that you're being presented with. So again, the environmental choice is one to move to the more downtown areas, but also to support the growth of our downtown areas. And then finally, the epidemiologist's discussion. I like to say the best day to be a planner in my career was August 7th, 2004, when this book came out, Urban Sprawl and Public Health, written by two epidemiologists and a planner. The planner's the cute one. And they basically said that, the reason that we have the first generation of Americans who are expected to live shorter lives than their parents, and that fully a third of all the children born after 2000 are expected to become diabetic, all these heart diseases are happening, is because we've designed out of existence in our country the useful walk. Walking used to get us somewhere, now walking doesn't get us anywhere anymore. And so we have all these weight-related illnesses. Obesity is a huge problem, and for years all we've been talking about is diet. But actually diet is half the picture, it's also calories burned. And calories burned are a function of trying to exercise, which people tend to start and not keep doing, or to have activity built into your daily lives, and that's the issue of planning. And I got this slide from one of those doctors. He said, the fact that we drive to the parking lot to take the escalator to the gym to get on the treadmill to walk is why we have such a morbid society, and we can fix that. And then there's also this thing, right? The fact that we lose so many people in car crashes and permanent injuries this man being interviewed after an accident, like right after, and we take it as just a part of life. The car crashes are going to happen to us and the people we love, but we don't necessarily realize, if you look at different countries, different developed nations, the U.S. is twice as bad as most of them in terms of the number of people that we lose on our roads, and it's a function of how much driving we're doing, a lot more, but also the kind of environments we're driving in and the speed that we're driving at. And then you dig deeper into the U.S. and you say, okay, well, how many car deaths per year for 100,000 does your community have? And, New York has 3.9, San Francisco 4.0, Dallas a lot more auto-centric, 9.8, and there's Arkansas. And you find just the more auto-dependent you are, the more spread out you are, the more this is happening. And this is the greatest cause of death and injury for healthy people. So that's a real factor as well. So those are the three arguments in super brief form. I do encourage you to watch this talk. You can just look up my name on TED and you'll find it. But let's get into the real reason I'm here, because I know you're all thinking already that our cities need to be more walkable. So how can we make our cities and our communities, our towns, our main streets more walkable? And we begin with this concept, which hopefully I've convinced you already believe, that walkable places are thriving places. And if that's the case, how do you get people to walk? And it boils down to what I've named my general theory of walkability. It's a bit of a joke, but it's a true theory, which is like a hypothesis that you keep testing and modifying. And everywhere I go, even today, I learned some things that might modify this, or maybe have modified it a little bit. But the general theory of walkability, which is the backbone of this book, says is that in America, in which driving is so easy and so cheap, and we don't pay the full cost of driving by a long shot, and actually, if you own a mid-sized sedan, 4/5 of the cost of having that car are just owning it, and only 1/5 are driving. So the fixed costs are huge, the variable costs are small. Every mile you drive costs less than the mile before. It's sitting there in the driveway between you and everything. So in these circumstances, how do you create an environment in which people who have the choice will make the choice to walk? And the simple answer is the walk has to be as good as the drive. So how do we do that? The walk has to do 4 things simultaneously. It has to be useful, it has to be safe, it has to be comfortable, and it has to be interesting. And that's the structure of the Walkable City, it's the structure of my book, it's the structure of my talk tonight. So let's go through it. The reason to walk is a story I learned from my mentors, Andres Malani and Elizabeth Peter-Zyberg, and I always thank them because most of what I'm telling you tonight I learned from them. In fact, a lot of these slides I stole from them 10 years ago. But Andres used to give this talk that he called The Story of Planning. And he talked about how, in the 19th century, people were choking on the soot from the dark satanic mills, and the planners who were called planners said, hey, let's move the housing away from the factories, and maybe people will live longer. And they moved the housing away, and people did live longer, like immediately and dramatically they lived longer. And the planners were hailed as heroes, and we'd like to say they've been trying to repeat that experience ever since. So you have the onset of Euclidean zoning, the separation of the landscape into large areas of only single use. If you're a planning student now, you don't learn to do this anymore, right? You learn that mixing uses is better. In fact, I was an art history major, and they say that's not the best major for having a productive living. But I can tell you, you don't want a Rothko, you want a Syrah, right? And Syrah was the pointillist. And you can see the finer grained mix of uses, more confetti-like, the more walkable it's going to be, because obviously something that's different from what you're at, that's useful to you, is at a short distance from where you are. And I should say, even though we know this is wrong now, most of the time when I arrive at a place to do a plan, there's a plan already existing on the land, and it looks like this. So there's a whole bunch of planning we have to undo if we're going to make places more walkable again. And this, of course, is not a land use code, this is a land use map. It shows how the most walkable place in America varies its use. And that red color in the middle is actually vertically mixed use, right? So the more mixed, the better. And this is where I just have to take Andres and Liz's message one step further and tell you the story that Tim heard in 1989, maybe. I heard in 1988. But this is why I'm in this business, which is when Andres gave a talk that he used to give called towns versus sprawl. And he kind of lifted the veils from our eyes and said, do you realize there are only 2 tested ways to build community throughout history and across cultures? There's a million ways to make a city, but there's only 2 ways that we've tested by the thousands. One is the traditional neighborhood. This is Newburyport, Massachusetts, near where I live. And the other is suburban sprawl. And these are the only 2 ways. You're either building towards one model or you're building towards the other. The traditional neighborhood is defined as by being compact, walkable, and diverse. It's compact in that it tends to be about a 5-minute walk from edge to center. You're looking at several neighborhoods here at Newburyport. I don't know if there's a laser on this or not. Yes. It's diverse in the sense that you have bigger houses and smaller houses and apartments, different places to live. You have places to shop, places to work, places to worship, places to recreate. Most of your daily needs are within walking distance. And then it's walkable because actually there's lots of streets. So no one street needs to be that big. Now compared to sprawl, clearly not compact, clearly not diverse, right? A whole square miles will hold just one use, sometimes just one house over and over again. And then look, there's lots of streets, but look how few of the streets actually connect. Most of the streets are loops and cul-de-sacs, which means those few streets that do get you around have to carry all the through traffic. And they're designed around throughput, right? Moving as many vehicles as possible, as quickly as possible, which is why all these houses turn their backs to them. There are walls. There's not a single address on this entire street. We call them automotive sewers, because they're designed, like sewers are designed, to move as much stuff as they can, as quickly as they can. And we have the phenomenon of the cul-de-sac kid. The kid is very happy in his one little street on the big wheel until they're about 7 years old. And then they want some independence and you can't give it to them because they can't leave their street because their street is part of this network. So those are the 2 models. It's fun to break sprawl down into its constituent parts, the places where you only live, where you only work, where you only shop. High schools, other institutions are supersized or consolidated. Schools are still getting better. Even though we know smaller schools are better for education, schools are still getting better. When you consolidate, you separate. The bigger a school is, the further away from you it is. And the size of the parking lot compared to the size of the school tells you what you need to know. No child has ever walked in this school. No child will ever walk in this school. The sophomores and the freshmen are being driven by the seniors and the juniors with the death rates to prove it. And then even playing facilities. So Weston, which is near Fort Lauderdale, is very proud of its 8 soccer fields and its 8 baseball diamonds. But the kid who lives here actually has a 2.5-mile drive. It goes like this to get there. Of course, you look at them alone on this traffic sewer, right? And this is why we have the soccer mom. When I was young, I'm 54. When I was young, we didn't have soccer moms. What's funny is my mom didn't work. Now all the moms work, and they're also soccer moms and soccer dads who are also working. Everyone's stuck driving the kids around because they have access to 8 soccer fields, which are 2.5 miles away. Whereas I had access to 1 soccer field that was half a mile away. So, when you separate everything from everything else, and you reconnect only with automotive infrastructure, your federal highway system, which was designed for commerce and for vacation travel, basically becomes a commuter way. I tell people it's a 2-part deal. This is the American dream still for some people, but if you want this, you're also going to have that. You can't have one without the other. Often to absurd extremes. And the amount we invest, you never have to wait more than 1 cycle at a light, right? Because if you have to spend more than 1 cycle in this environment, you want to shoot yourself. So you have to get through the light immediately. And of course, sometimes you can. It's not Photoshop. It's stressful on families. The longer your commute, I'm not kidding, the longer your commute, the more likely you are to be divorced. That's been proved. And then driving is no fun, and being a pedestrian can work. So that's the model. That's this model. And you've got this model, and you've also got this model. In fact, you've got like a bunch of this in this area, and I listed 4 of them today that I'll be talking about more. But notice it's the same stuff, right? It's the same stuff, but how big is it, and how far apart is it? And then the second thing to point out is the branching dendritic street system versus the network. When you drive from the highway to the arterial to the collector, to the cul-de-sac, that's a dendritic branching system. And it's very bad, not just for walking, but for driving also. Because if there's one engine fire on the collector road, the whole city shuts down for the afternoon, right? And that doesn't happen in our traditional downtowns. So we're still on this subject of the useful walk. So everything I just said was about building new places. And new places are being built in America, like a city a day, if you count the number of houses and shops and other things that are going up. They're just going up as pieces of sprawl, so we don't know it. But how about the existing places? There, when you want to enhance walkability in an existing place, you look at the mix of uses. So looking at a place like downtown Fayetteville, you ask yourself, what's missing? Of all the possible uses we could have in this area, what uses are missing and underrepresented? And in almost every American downtown, housing is underrepresented by a long shot. And when you bring housing back and start to really pile the housing into the city centers, as some cities are doing, then everything else gets better. Shopping gets better. Oklahoma City went from having almost no shops downtown to now a whole bunch of cool shops and stores and cafes downtown because they invested in housing in the downtown. There's a separate question. I was asked to address this because I know something that you're talking about in some of your communities right now, which is what use is underpriced and overrepresented? And in almost every American city, particularly the smaller ones, it's parking. And there's a much longer conversation we could have about parking. It all comes from this fellow who maybe should come out here to speak. He's the Dean of Parking. His name's Donald Shoup. He has a Facebook following called the Shoupistas. He wrote an amazing book called The High Cost of Free Parking. It's 723 pages and weighs 3.5 pounds. And it's a lot. But I had jury duty, so I read it. And what I learned was there's basically 3 legs to the stool of properly providing parking in your community. Not, what makes Don Shoup famous and successful and being listened to by everyone these days is that he finally asked the right question about parking. He stopped asking, how can we have enough parking? Which is all anyone ever asks. And he said, how can we provide, manage, and price parking so that our communities will thrive? And let me prove it. And what he found was, the first thing is you have to get rid of the on-site parking requirement. You can still have parking requirements, but they need to be collective within the community. The on-site parking requirement, is why we're turning opera houses into parking lots in some of our cities. And it destroys walkability. It's a fertility drug for cars, as he puts it. Parking needs to be managed collectively, not shop by apartment, by business. The second issue, which is the most complex and worth talking about, is how do you price parking? And the answer is you price it in relation to demand. So that the main street costs more than the surrounding streets, costs even more from the streets which are further away. So the pricing, this is probably the first parking plan in America for Redwood City, California. The price reflects the value. Maybe if you want people parking in the structure and not on street, then you price the structure less than the street. People wonder why it's a nightmare in New York City. Everyone's double and triple parking in New York City because it's cheaper to park on the street than in a parking structure, right? So you just price it relative to demand in order to manage it like any other good that has a value. And when you do that, you tend to find that prices go up. And prices going up is something that merchants are very afraid of, people complain a lot about, which is why his stool has a third leg, which is the Parking Benefits District. And here's the one in Pasadena, California, where it says, your meter money makes a difference in Old Pasadena, where they kept raising the pricing. They kept raising the fee of the pricing. What he says is you want one space empty per block face at all times. It's an 85% occupancy. And you want the price that gets you that. And when you do that, the price goes up. And in Pasadena, they let you know what it's doing. And the way that they sold it to the merchants is every extra dollar they earned went into new sidewalks, new trees, new storefront rehabilitations, all into the same neighborhood. They used to have rear alleys, now they have this amazing collection of public walkable places. There are no dumpsters because every block has a central compaction facility. This is what happened when they put the money back into the community. And of course, it's this virtuous circle where it keeps getting better and better. And people pay properly for parking. If you don't want to pay the price, you just park a little further away. So it's a longer conversation, but the main thing to understand about parking is that it's a good that has value. And if you, like any other non-communist regime, if you let the price reflect the value, you'll have a good outcome. And then the last category in the useful walk is transit. You can have a perfectly walkable neighborhood without transit, but a walkable city requires transit, because if you don't connect the walkable parts to each other, then those people who want that walkable lifestyle will still feel the need to get a car, and they'll all buy cars, and the whole system, the whole region will grow around their cars, and then it will become less walkable. So, here I've been told the most efficient, this is the bus that the university gave to the Ozark regional transit system, but the investment is well worth it if walkability is your goal, but it's important to look at it from both sides and remind the transit agencies, because sometimes transit agencies are fighting for streets that are less walkable. They want swoopier corners and wider lanes and other things so they can plow their buses very quickly through neighborhoods and stay on schedule. You need to remind the transit agencies that every ride begins and ends as a walk, and that if they don't demand walkable communities around their buses, actually their buses won't have good ridership. So it's kind of a two-way deal. I think that, I know Jarrett Walker spoke. Who heard Jarrett Walker here? Okay, about a third of you. Jarrett spoke about the proposals to have regional bus rapid transit here. I think he came down on a more of a boosterism for localized transit, because your region is so spread out and it is so automotive. And when you arrive in one of your different cities, Bentonville or Fayetteville or Springdale or Rogers, you often find yourself in a place where you then do need to drive. And so I think transit makes a lot more sense city by city, community by community. You can see how more shuttles operating around Fayetteville, which is the place I know better, would be very impactful if you didn't have to wait for them, and they were always running with such headways that you never had to look at a schedule. I think that's the sort of transit that would be more impactful in a more rural region like this one than bus rapid transit. But that's not my specialty, so I'll move on. So that was the reason to walk. The safe walk is the biggest category. I'm going to spend most of my time in this category. It's the one that cities can impact the fastest with the roads that they build and rebuild. And it all circles around this diagram, which is that people in cities drive the speed, not the speed that's marked, but the speed that they feel safe driving. And there's 100 different aspects of your environment that cue you as a driver to drive faster or to drive slower. And if you can get drivers going 20 to 25, you're a ton safer than if they're driving 30 to 35. You're about 8 times more likely to die being hit by a car going 35 than being hit by a car going 25. So that threshold, which many drivers in your cities are hovering around, is a really important one. So the question is then, what aspects of the environment can we influence in order to make driving safer? It's really to get people to drive the speed limit, right? The first one, which is more of a long-term discussion, is block size. This is Portland, Oregon, famously walkable, famously 200-foot blocks in Portland. This is Salt Lake City, famously less walkable, famously 600-foot, gigantic blocks in Salt Lake City. This is my family crossing the street in Salt Lake City. They give you flags to hold up so you aren't run down. And here you see them side by side. It's remarkable, right? You can fit 9 of these blocks basically in one Salt Lake City block. And the problem is, given the same amount of development roughly, a 200-foot block city can basically be a 2-lane city. And Portland averages streets that are about 2 lanes wide, whereas Salt Lake City is essentially a 5-lane city because the blocks are so big. And of course, the more lanes, the less safe the streets, and the more it feels like a highway, and the faster people drive. This is 24 different California cities. When you double the average block size, you almost quadruple the number of non-highway fatal crashes. So the data is very clear. This is Fayetteville, 200 foot, roughly. This was shocking to me because I work all over the country and all over this region in the Midwest and Oklahoma and other places. You guys in this region, going from city to city, this is Fayetteville next to Portland. You have some of the smallest blocks I've ever seen. So this is Fayetteville, Bentonville. It's all about the same model. They're a little more than 200 feet in one direction and sometimes a little bit longer in the other, but maybe 250 in Bentonville. Here's Rogers. Look at these beautiful small blocks. This is where we say you've got good bones. You can grow up to be a model. because you're starting with the right foundation, these wonderful small blocks. And of course, you've got areas we all do, like this. This is West Rogers, the Frisco Station Mall, which we call bad bones. But actually what it really is it's just the wrong bones. This is where we get back to this, this diagram. Because you've got parts of your cities, I don't want to make you feel too good about yourself, because you all, like the rest of America, most of your cities are consisting of the wrong model. But when you get to the places where walkability is possible, you've actually got a wonderful foundation for it. So you're already on the second base, we're good there. The next, of course, as I suggested, the number of lanes. The more lanes there are, the more highway-like it is, but that applies not just to highways, but to city streets as well. This is Oklahoma City before we fixed it. And a discussion, I need to have everywhere I go, particularly in places where they complain of traffic. And we sat in some traffic today, getting from city to city. It wasn't even rush hour, but there was serious traffic on some of the arterials we were on. And people think, oh, we can fix that problem. All we have to do is widen the streets. So, we're expecting the demand for driving to go up, and there's congestion now, which is the distance between the demand and the capacity. So we widen the highway or the main street, and we absorb the growth, which would be great if that ever happened. But it never happens, it has never happened. Because what happens is this: people drive more in what's called induced traffic. Also, generally speaking, it's called induced demand. Now, why does this happen? If you think about it, it makes perfect sense. The only real constraint to driving in congested systems is that very congestion, right? It's the way that we really pay for being a motorist. We don't pay the full cost of driving, but boy, when we're stuck in traffic, we're paying a major cost of driving. It's a time cost, it's a frustration cost, and it's the main thing that won't stop us from driving. When you remove that impediment, right, when you remove that congestion, people make decisions like they move further away from work because the house has nicer, bathroom fixtures, right? They stop carpooling, or they stop taking transit that was available. They choose to commute more on peak. And what you find in a lot of American cities is it's simply whether people choose to commute right on peak or not. And if you increase supply of lanes, the rush hour just consolidates, but the traffic is just as bad. So this is Newsweek magazine, hardly an esoteric publication. Today's engineers acknowledge that building new roads usually makes traffic worse. And I read this and I jumped for joy, and then I realized, who are these engineers, man? Please meet some of them. Now, this was a decade ago, and things have really changed. And I've now met a lot of these engineers. In fact, I learned all of this from traffic engineers. But most of the traffic engineers I work with in most cities tell you, we need to widen that street because the traffic is coming. And you widen it and the traffic comes, and they say, see, I told you so. But of course, it was the widening that caused the traffic. Here's the study presented at the Paris School of Economics, the fundamental law of highway congestion, very straightforward. I don't know what this means, but I know what this means, which is essentially immediately all the new capacity is met to 40% with new trips, and within 4 years it's 100% met with new trips. Sometimes instantaneously it's overwhelmed. So they just widened the 405 in California, and as soon as it opened, the traffic made up for the $1 billion that they had spent. And so, there are reasons to build more roads. There are reasons to widen roads, but don't let traffic be one of them. That's my main lesson to you here. I'm not saying there's never a reason to build a road, never a reason to widen a road. But don't let anyone do, as they always do, as they still do. Everywhere I go, they still say we need more lanes because of congestion. You 200 people will stop them from doing it. But then here's a neat trick, because I always make this argument wherever I go, and I say, well, we may or may not win that war, but let's focus on something that's very winnable, which is your 4-lane roads, of which you have quite a few. Here in Rogers, there's Walnut Street. I'm going to show you some more, but it's what's called the classic 4-to-3 classic American road diet, where you take a 4-lane road and you turn it into a 3-lane road. And you can see 4-lane roads, from experience, 4-lane roads are inherently the most dangerous, right? This car stops for you, you go to turn, this car hits you. It's dangerous because the turning lane is also the fast lane. It's inefficient because the fast lane is also the turning lane. And that's the opportunity, is how incredibly inefficient these roads are. So no one is surprised when you go from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, the number of injuries drops precipitously all the time. But this is the surprising part. These are 23 different road diets all across the US. This is the number of trips per day on them before and the number of trips after. If you total the 2 columns, you'll find out that there's actually a net increase, that you lose 0 capacity when you remove a lane. And of course that lane becomes available to be bike lanes, to be a parking lane, to be something else. But it's a win-win-win. Safer, more space for something else, and no decrease in road capacity. So that's an easy win. It's available for places like Archibald Yale here in Fayetteville. I love this name, Archibald Yale. It's like, I'm coming from New England. I have all these preconceived notions about the Ozarks. So I'm just going to call it Archibald Holler. But anyway, so that's a road that's available. And of course, I'm not the first person to suggest this. Nelson Nygaard, which is probably the best traffic engineering firm in the U.S., or traffic planning firm in the U.S., has already proposed a proper road diet, although these lanes should be 10 feet wide, as we'll discuss, not 11, but a proper road diet for it. But people are concerned about traffic, and they should be concerned. But the car counts on this road are well in range of the car counts on these 21 other roads. So you can have confidence. And there's also the issue that the before and afters are always the same, or roughly the same. So don't let congestion or perceptions of congestion stop this from happening. So there's Walnut Street. We mentioned also Walnut Street and Rogers. I think there's one other that I have not shown. But it's not a 5-lane. You get a lot of 5 lanes that I can't help you with, right? But the 4-laners can be 3-laners. Next is the width of the lanes. This is the street, the typical road, the typical subdivision in America, which allows you to witness the curvature of the earth. Because the standards just keep getting bigger and bigger. So this is a subdivision from the 60s, and here's one from the 80s. Same height of airplane. Look what happened to the streets, right? 60s, 80s. Because there's been this mission creep. The standards kept getting wider and wider. This is my old neighborhood in South Beach in Miami, and when the road wasn't draining properly, we had to rebuild it, but we had to rebuild it to the new standard, which meant we lost half our sidewalks and all our street trees, because this new standard kind of blindly, just kicks in. Wider streets are faster streets. We've been saying it for years. Now we have data to show it. As you increase the width of the lane, you increase the speed of the driver. Similarly, as you increase the width of the lane from 10 feet to 12 feet, you quintuple the likelihood of dangerous injuries on that street. One study said that increased lane widths are responsible for about 900 additional traffic fatalities per year. And we've been showing this image for many years, and I've been asking the question, when will we learn? Right? We're a corrective society. We make mistakes, we fix our mistakes. And this is just one more mistake we need to fix. And the good news is that we're getting there. Certainly citizens for many years, and this is 1997, right? Citizens in Birmingham, Michigan demanding narrower streets. Portland, Oregon, famously progressive, has had a skinny streets program. And these are the kind of streets now in residential neighborhoods. They're called yield streets. These are illegal most of the places I go. We have to make them legal again. Where you basically have a 12-foot travel lane that handles cars going in both directions because it's a low-flow residential street. And we built these, so you have to fight. This is in Mount Pleasant outside of Charleston. This is a two-way street. And you fight and you win, hopefully, and you build these two-way streets, which are the streets you want your kids to grow up on because cars can't speed on them. Vince Graham is the developer of this project. He's a good speaker. He goes to lecture and he shows these streets he's very proud of and brags about his narrow rights of way. And he quotes this famous philosopher who said, "Broad is the road that leads to destruction. Narrow is the road that leads to life." This plays well in the Deep South. In terms of business, in terms of downtown streets, of busy streets, of non-residential streets, this is the new standard. Thank goodness for NACDO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, who finally last year came out and said that 10 feet should be the standard. Most cities don't have a 10-foot standard. Most cities have an 11-foot or a 12-foot standard. And every foot really counts in terms of the speed of vehicles. Drivers know intuitively, instinctively, that a 12-foot lane is a highway lane, so you can go 70 in. Yet many cities require, like Omaha, Nebraska, requires 12-foot lanes downtown. So I zipped around in the Google machine, found a whole bunch of opportunities. Here in Bentonville, Northeast 2nd Street, this should be 36 feet, 10-10-8-8, but it's 42 feet. So you've got an extra 6 feet there. As you head east, it's more of a residential street, so we've got bike sheros, still 26 feet. This could be 20 feet, right? An extra 6 feet. What can we use those 6 feet for? The answer is, all right, let's put in one bike lane. And we'll, on a parallel road, we'll put in the other bike lane. For example, then you have 10-foot travel lanes. Here's School Street in Fayetteville, another 26-footer that should be 20. So you can stick in one, we find these everywhere. Room for just one bike lane. Oh, you can't fit 2 bike lanes, fine. Put one here and one somewhere else. Or, bikers in the room, cover your ears. Put one in and don't put the other one in if there's nowhere for it. Because even just having one, if the biker can't get home, but it's better than having the wide lanes. And then, you guys know this, because in Springdale, this is the new construction in downtown Springdale, it's extending the downtown. This is a beautiful 36, 10-10-8-8, beautiful 36-foot section. So, you know, I always like to say when I go places, all the great stuff you're doing before I get here. I think you're aware, thanks to Walton Family Foundation grants and other people in the design center, the university here. A lot of great stuff's been happening here for a long time. It's not happening universally everywhere though, so we need to spread it around. This is an example of a good standard in place in Springdale. But the other point I want to make is this is expensive. And as Tim pointed out, when you rebuild, you actually, it turns out you find out the pipes are rotting and you have to rebuild absolutely everything. And it's super expensive. For the price of rebuilding one street, you can restripe like 10 streets. And most of the places I go, like I've restriped, they've just started building it, but this last year I restriped the entirety of downtown Tulsa. 30 miles of streets are within that 1 square mile core of Tulsa. And they're slowly going to rebuild them as they come up for repair according to the new standard, without having to put any money into the construction because it's just paint, right? The next issue that we like to discuss, it's its own good, but it also makes walking safer. And by the way, there's always someone who stands up in the meeting and says, what about bicyclists killing pedestrians? I heard about that woman in Central Park who got run down. Statistically, you are more likely to be hit by lightning while a vending machine is falling on you than you are to be hit by a bicyclist as a pedestrian. And a street that has bicycles in it is a street that's safer for everybody. So bicycling is great for walking, but on its own, it's the single greatest planning revolution currently underway in only some American cities. And you look at Portland, a city that spent $60 million on biking over about 30 years. It took a while. But they went from biking in Portland, Oregon, they went from biking about the same as everyone else to biking 10 times as much as everyone else. And I asked my friend Tom Brennan for some pictures of the bike commute. And he sent me these pictures. I said, well, this bike to work day? So this is Tuesday in Portland. And the basic rule of biking is that population follows infrastructure. And don't build like one lane or do a tactical urbanism temporary install and say that you don't have bikers, because you need to build a network that's useful. But once you have a useful network, you will see your biking population increase. That's what we find everywhere. I saw a lot of bikers tonight. I think it's because they all came to this talk. But there seems to be a lot of biking in this area already. It will get better with better infrastructure. This, of course, is the new gold standard. This is in Chicago. This is called the protected bike lane, where you pull the parking off the curb. You eliminate one lane. We call those extra lanes. You eliminate an extra lane. Pull the parked cars off the curb, the cars protect the bikes. This guy's in the wrong lane. This is a two-way bike lane. But it worked so well, they went back and they rebuilt, they painted it green, still the wrong lane. But this is the gold standard. If you can do it, it really works. This is in New York. Prospect Park West went from 3 lanes to 2 lanes, plus a protected cycle track, 2-way. Of course, the number of cyclists tripled. Of course, speeding dropped precipitously, crashes dropped precipitously, but surprisingly, this street handles no fewer cars per hour than it did before. And that's another of those counterintuitive things. People were basically speeding from red light to red light, and now everyone's driving more safely. And this being New York City, of course, there was a huge lawsuit that lasted about 5 years Eventually the bike hitting unity trolls gradually surrendered to reality. But this makes the point, you'd be very happy having your young daughter in this street. Not so much this. Now this is still an improvement over what in many places this is as good as we can get, because there isn't room for a cycle track. And it makes the driving lane narrower. But the reason that cycle tracks are better is that if someone's always parking or putting something in the bike lane. And now with all the deliveries that we get, there's always an Amazon truck or a UPS truck. So it's important to somehow try and protect your bike lanes. So, I mentioned the extra room in Northeast 2nd Street. There are the sharrows. The latest data, this is really interesting, the latest data, well, it'll be in my next book, I can tell you that, which is coming out next year. They did a study and found that roads that had switched to sharrows were actually more dangerous than if they hadn't put sharrows in them at all. So, there's a new word, it's prayer road, which is, people hope the cars will be nice to you, but they're not nice to you. So sharrows are not bicycle facilities. So biking is not a cult, it's serious business. Businessmen, especially businessmen who want to attract talent, are demanding more bike lanes. For many years, this was people's impression of the cyclist, the mammal, the middle-aged man in lycra, right? But that is not your cyclist. This is your cyclist that you're trying to attract. And in most cities, if you're interested in equity, transportation equity, statistics suggest that this is the cyclist who you're serving the most when you put in a protected bike lane. And of course, students, right? Here you have the university, so close to downtown. What I didn't know when I was looking at Google was the giant gully in the middle. But I recognized that, and I wanted to credit you for this incredible accomplishment, right? Most cities haven't done something like this recently, but 36 miles, it was nothing, and then it was a vision, and then it was a reality, and now you've built it, and it's such an incredible asset. I think, though, that this needs to be matched with more in-street facilities, particularly in Fayetteville, accessing the university with another key component, which Tim mentioned to me, which is the electric bike. So having an electric bike share with stations downtown and stations at the college, I think would make a big difference in who might choose to come downtown without their cars. Now, the other point I have to bring up, I wasn't going to, but I recently did a bike plan for University of Alabama. And it's just so hard because there's so much parking on campus and the policies really encourage students to own cars. From what I can see at your campus here, the same thing is happening here. And universities are responsible for producing full human beings, not just people who are employable or academically strong, but people who have healthy habits or are going to have vital lives and be well-rounded, healthy individuals. And a university that has that in their charter will not make it easy for the students to own cars. And I hope you'll share that with your president. The next point that makes this street safe is the parallel parking. Parallel parking, often forgotten, is an essential barrier of steel that protects the sidewalk from moving vehicles. This is happy hour in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, famous for its happy hour. Notice you're allowed to park here, and you're not allowed to park here. This is happy hour on the park side, and happy hour on the not park side. And this happens everywhere if you look for it. No one wants to sit or walk where there isn't parallel parking. Street trees are the other part of this picture. You have to spec the right street trees. You can't specify crepe myrtles or little flowering trees. You should specify trees that will grow and be big and strong. The engineers used to fight street trees. They called them FHOs, fixed and hazardous objects. You can't have street trees because they make driving more dangerous. Until someone did a study and found out actually that the street's the same street. It has a stretch with no trees and a stretch with trees. Guess which part has the most accidents? The part with no trees, because when there's a tree, drivers slow down. And they drive more safely. Sometimes they slow down abruptly. But better to be hitting the tree than a pedestrian. And this is what a street feels like when you don't have the parallel parking, right? When you don't have the street view. Now, this is fun. This is what I call objective journalism. This is the Las Vegas Sun. I'm talking about the half-failed city center. Some say the entrance to city center is not inviting to pedestrians. Oh, really? And this is where we get into vocabulary. Is this a pedestrian vocabulary or an automotive vocabulary? And this is why actually I like roundabouts, but not in downtowns. Because anything that's swoopy or curvy, has stream-formed geometrics, aerodynamic shapes, tells you it's for cars and not for people. And vocabulary is very important. And here's where I can add something, a little something to your discussion that actually probably hasn't been brought up here yet. This one has, I got something else. This one has, which is, it's inevitably, in any city, the DOT added road from the 1960s, which is absolutely the worst, most anti-pedestrian, and typically most curvilinear road in the city. Looking at this just makes me want to hammer on the accelerator, right? And so we know not to do that anymore, but here's the subtle thing. In Bentonville, look at this left-hand turn lane. This is a little dinky left-hand turn lane, but someone's applying highway engineering to your little downtown street. You have to swoop all the way to the right in order to sweep left to turn. Now there's two ways to do left-hand turn lanes. The traditional way is just to drop some parking on the curb and add a left turn lane. But this is how it's got to be done on a highway so that they work at 50 miles an hour, and it's been imported into cities. So now we have 50 mile an hour standards in our cities, which of course wipe out a whole flank of parking along the side of the street because of this bulb in nose. This is the wrong way. This is the right way. It's an Albuquerque, this one. But that's a new model an old model that needs to be new again. So a little something I can leave behind. Stop doing that. And look, you have room for all this parallel parking if this wasn't there, because the whole street's been widened around this swoop, right? That was the safe walk. The last two categories are much faster, so we won't be here all night, just half the night. But now you know all about streets. So I'm leaving you, this is an out my own, I'm leaving you with the strength of street knowledge from Northwest Arkansas. Now, the comfortable walk. The comfortable walk is a little counterintuitive. We Americans, we like to climb mountains, get broad views. Everyone likes a big prospect, right? But the evolutionary biologists will tell us that all animals, humans among them, were simultaneously seeking prospect and refuge. We want to be able to see our predators from a distance, and we want to know that our flanks are covered from attack. And if our flanks don't feel covered, we don't feel comfortable, we don't feel safe. It's in our bones, we can't help it, which is why we pay all the money to get on the airplane and fly to Europe to have experiences like this. And a plaza is only as good as its edges. A street is only as good as what we call street walls, right? So, spaces that we enjoy are shaped around us. One of the reasons why this museum feels so great is because you're in an outdoor living room. And we should be designing our streets as outdoor living rooms. This is inside the museum, but you can find great examples everywhere. Right? Sheila, one of my favorites. But, a street that's well-defined by tall edges feels like a place. Even better, there's a little deflection at the end. Right? So we knew urbanists have been talking about this for some time. 3-to-1 is great. 1-to-1, the Renaissance ideal. Beyond 1-to-6, roughly, you lose your sense of enclosure. Trees can help a lot, right? But beyond there, you don't feel enclosed. And God forbid if you lose one building on one side or another building on the other side. So, 6-to-1, Salzburg is an absolute delight. And of course, the opposite of Salzburg, we all know, is Houston. This is an old picture. Houston's doing so much better. If you've been there recently, this part of town is really coming back. The main lesson here is that the surface parking lot is the principal villain. And I have to say, my biggest surprise coming here, or I should say I cheated, my biggest surprise coming here via Google 2 days ago and looking around is you're quite different. The 4 main towns here are quite different from almost everywhere I go. The wonderfully intact nature of your street walls surrounding your city centers. And it's really marvelous, and you should be grateful for that. And I'm sure some of the people in the room had something to do with that. But normally when you go to a city, at least 1 or 3 of these are surface parking lots. So you're starting from a very good position, and we just need to understand that this is what makes places feel comfortable. Look at this beautiful, almost 1-to-1 ratio. Walnut Street and Rogers. Here in Springdale, fantastic shapes. And that's the goal, shaping our spaces. That's the comfortable walk. Finally, the interesting walk. This is a 1-to-1 ratio. This is in Grand Rapids, where I've done a lot of work. Renaissance ideal 1-to-1 street ratio. Of course, no one wants to walk down this street, which connects the 2 best hotels, Because when one side of the street is an exposed parking deck, and the other side is a conference facility that was apparently designed in admiration for that parking deck, which is boring. And here's where we have to get a little bit into architecture. Blame the architects. Now, I'm treated as an architect. I like to think of myself as an architect. I love architects and architecture, but actually this is where architecture really does matter. But we learned, for example, in Charleston, it only takes 20 feet of building to hide 200 feet of parking garage. And the cities that care about walkability, this is an unbreakable rule. Right? This is the one in Miami, I call it the Chia Pet Garage. Same idea, the low buildings in the front. And then of course you've got the good, the bad, and the ugly here. Before you knew better, building parking lots up against the edges of streets. Luckily students will walk through anything, right? They're not looking at their phones anyhow. But look at this building, recently built. This thin little edge here. I said, what's that? What could that be? And I zoom in. This is fantastic, right? It only takes 20 feet. That looks like about 18 feet to build a really nice edge to a parking lot. And then you look at the latest stuff on campus. This tells me a couple things. The main thing it tells me is that you're encouraging students to drive. But the second thing it tells me is, look how sophisticated. You see what we're looking at here? These are 60-foot thick, normal thick housing that's completely hiding the parking decks. So this skill is clearly here, it just needs to be universally applied. We can't let the parking decks be up against the edge of the streets. And then there's just the quality of the architecture, the variety. The best places have the most variety. I don't care if it's new or old, but there's a reason to walk down the street when things change. And then, of course, there's variety and lack of variety, but there's also detail and lack of detail. And here's where, for the architecture professors in the room, I have to say, I don't hate modern architecture. What I hate is minimalist architecture. Because minimalist architecture gives you no reason to walk by it, because it's minimal. So this is a wonderful comparison done by Leon Creer of a traditional kind of Renaissance palazzo and what we call a modern flash cube sitting in the distance. And you notice that looking at these two images, you see a little bit of detail. They're not revealing too much. But then you get a little closer, if you choose to, you get a little closer. And suddenly you see rustication, you see string courses, you see a cornice, you see windows, but this remains the same. Then you get even closer, right? No change. Here there's rafter tails and window frames. So it rewards closer inspection. And that's why architecture needs to have detail if it is to support walkability. So a street like this where each building has the mark of the individual hand, many hands at work, lovingly crafting the building facades is important, and this doesn't do that. So that's another lesson I wanted to share with you. And I show my own house at this point in my lecture to tell you that I love modern architecture. I just don't love minimal art. Finally, blank walls. So sometimes you've just got a walkable area and a walkable area, you've got a blank wall in between. It was mentioned I worked for 4 years at the National Endowment for the Arts, and I dedicated a lot of money through grant making to public art. And fortunately, we were kind of out of the era where it was the plot art, right? The calder that landed on the plaza. At least the calders people understood. Right? We went through decades of cities having 1% for art budgets and the federal government saying you must spend money on art in your federal buildings, and it was just this leftover thing that got left behind. But I'm interested in public art as a remedial act, and asking where are the places where people aren't going to walk because they just don't feel safe. And maybe that's where we dedicate the funding to make it interesting. Because, I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, when I introduced this topic, the last topic, the interesting walk, you can have a walk that's useful, safe, and comfortable, but if you're bored, and you have a choice, you will not make that walk. And so keeping the walk interesting is really important. So this is the American version. Here's the European version. So keep it clean, take care of it. So those are the 4 categories. And I want to say that you've got a ton of work already happening here, as was mentioned. You've got plans from 2004, you've got plans from 2016, and the classic thing that great planners like Gilbert Cole do when they do a plan for an existing downtown is to say, what are the missing teeth? what are the missing teeth that we can infill with new buildings to hold the edge of the street? But there's so many different opportunities, right? There's another one. You've got lots of opportunities. And the question is, where do you invest first? As a city, where can you incentivize using tax increment financing or just speedier permitting? How can you make it happen in the place where it's going to have the most impact? And I have a few points to make about that, since we have so many choices. The first is to understand that this is really, it's not pick or choose. As I think my talk has suggested, if you don't do all four of these, you don't create a walkable environment. You create an environment which people will only walk if they absolutely have to, and that's not walkability. Which is why it doesn't, in my mind, make sense. Down here, yes. And as you get closer to downtown, yes. It does not make sense to invest in beautiful lights and brand new infrastructure, ostensibly making it more walkable, in an area that fails to be safe, and fails to be comfortable, and fails to be interesting. You really need to get all four. So the first mention is invest. What we usually do is we invest first in striping, in restriping. For example, perhaps this 4-laner, what could this 4-laner be? A 3-laner. But invest in restriping in those places where actually the other categories are kind of on their way to being satisfied, so you can have the whole length of the line. But what's also interesting to note is that the reason to walk, the comfortable walk, and the interesting walk are almost entirely a function of the buildings and other stuff that's lining the road. And those are principally stuff that's built by the private sector. And the city on the short term, because most of the cities I work in, they want change now. The city on the short term can't really control those. They can start now to change their codes, which I know has been done some in this area, and to incentivize development so that we get more buildings that are useful and comfortable and interesting lining the road, right? But that's a longer term effort. The shorter term opportunity, because many of my clients are cities, the shorter term opportunity is really right there. And so what we do is we find the places in a downtown where people aren't really walking in as much as they could, but we acknowledge that there are decent buildings surrounding the street already. The walk is already useful, comfortable, and interesting, but it doesn't feel safe. And you invest in restriping those roads first. And that's a strategy we call urban triage, which is a term I don't use when I'm actually doing the work because it scares people away. Right? But urban triage basically says, let's spend our money where it will have the most impact. And so, for example, the downtown street redesign that we just completed for Tulsa, we designed 30 miles of streets within their 1 mile square downtown core. But then we prioritized it based on actually where people would make the choice to walk, if that walk were made safe, and not just to scatter it randomly across the downtown. So it's a little bit complex, but understanding that the pedestrian is kind of the canary in the coal mine of human existence, and that it really needs such a perfect environment to exist, that you really want to start small and excellent and build outward. And you know, most mayors, most city councilors, they feel an obligation to their whole city. Certainly the city planner feels an obligation to the whole city. And there's this temptation to sprinkle the walkability fairy dust absolutely everywhere. But that does not cause it to have an impact. You want to concentrate and create excellence and build outward from excellence. And that's where you focus your new housing, that's where you focus your tax increment financing, that's where you focus everything. Start from excellence and move outward. So I believe that's my entire talk. However, before I go, I will, and we're not going to do Q&A because I've dragged on for so long, but I will be signing books out in the hallway, and I welcome conversations. And I want to leave you with these resources. First, the book you already have. Secondly, the other books, Urban Nation was mentioned. I also recommend, because I helped write it, the Smart Growth Manual. There's the TED Talk I told you about, but there's another TED Talk that's more like this one. So if you go to TED, you'll find both these talks. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, they're only 15 minutes long. But that resource is also available. My website is jeffspeck.com, and you have access to all these different things there. And then finally, every summer I teach a 2-day course at Harvard at the architecture school that's open to everybody. It's not cheap, and you have to get to Harvard, but when you're done, they give you a piece of paper that makes it look like you graduated from Harvard. So it's like a really good deal. So I hope that some of you, and just let me know, email me through my website if you're interested in coming, and I'll make that possible for you. And there's my website. I think that's it. So thank you so much